Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another one of our TEPSA Presents episode. If you are joining us live tonight and you survived the craziness of STAR today, thank you for being here after what I'm sure was a very stressful day. But we here at TEPSA are pleased to have these conversations twice a month. And actually, over the next couple weeks, we'll be having them every week as we give you some previews into our summer conference. So be checking that out every Tuesday from here on out. But anyway, we are excited to have these constant conversations, timely topics that leaders in all walks could really benefit from. If you can check out all of our past episodes on our website, on our YouTube page, on our Facebook, and even on our podcast. We put them everywhere so you can get to them as you need to. My name is Todd Neslony. I'm the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership here at the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association. This week, we've got another Monica. Monica, thank you for being here. Kind of tell everybody who you are, and then I'll talk about the topic.
Thanks, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here, especially on a crazy day like this. So I'm Monica Brady-Myerov. I am the founder and CEO of Listenwise. And Listenwise is a platform that brings podcasts to classrooms. We have a collection of more than 2,500 curriculum-aligned podcasts for grades 2 to 12. And it really helps you keep teaching connected to the real world while building your student listening skills at the same time. And I'm also just about to release a book. Wiley is publishing it. Comes out in a couple weeks, called Listenwise, Teach Students to be Better Listeners. So I like to think of myself as an expert in listening, and I'm happy to share everything I know with you tonight about how to bring more audio into your teaching and help students build their listening muscle.
Well, bravo. Congratulations on the book. I know that is not an easy feat at all, and I'm sure there's nerves as it comes out. But also, I got to tell you, I'm excited to talk tonight about listening skills because even just hearing you talk right there, I'm a huge podcast junkie, especially like crime podcasts, and there's great leadership podcasts. I mean, anytime I go on a road trip, that's what I turn to first because I feel like it makes time go even faster than music sometimes. So I know we've got a lot to talk about when it comes to listening skills, which is today's topic, which I think all of us could always be bettering ourselves on as being better listeners. But I'd love to kind of just start with that. When I hear the word listening skills, where do we even start? Like, how would you even define that?
Well, Todd, you're absolutely right, because first of all, about 80% of what we learn through listening. And it's hearing is a skill that we have, or it's a sense that we have even before we're born. And we send our kids to school, with this hearing skill, with the ability to listen, but we don't take time to teach them how to listen as a skill. We focus on reading, writing, math. That's all important. But what I want to talk about is how important listening is in building your active listening skills for lifelong success, because it plays a huge role in learning how to read and being successful at reading, in learning another language, in being engaged in content. And there's so many great resources out there today. As you said, you're a fan of the crime podcasts. I'm a fan of the news podcasts. There's so many out there. And the latest statistics show that one of the fastest growing age groups listening to podcasts is ages 12 plus, 12 to like 34. So your students are listening to podcasts. Your students are engaged with audio. And you should think about how to bring it into your classroom so that you can get a hook on this really cool new medium that's just exploding right now.
Well, and you made a good point there. Podcasts are really hot right now. If you pay attention to influencers on social media or different celebrities, a lot of them are beginning their own podcasts, and there's podcasts over all the TV shows you watch. So more and more younger students and kids are getting into this. And so, but you said something in there that I thought just really struck me, and that was how listening really supports literacy. So talk to me more about that, because, I think a lot of people would hear that right away and go, how am me listening something actually going to help me read better or help me understand words or any of that, or comprehend or fluency? How does that actually tie together?
Well, I mean, listening comprehension is a fundamental block of reading comprehension development. I mean, you just looking at The Simple View of Reading by Goff and Tumner, and you see decoding and language comprehension. But underneath language comprehension are a couple of things. Listening comprehension is one of them. Vocabulary is another. And this listening comprehension is really such a key component of language comprehension. So any of you out there who are the early reading instructors understand that hearing the word, the phonetics of the word, and not just the way the phonemic awareness, in addition to just the fluency of listening to good speaking or good reading out loud, is fundamental in learning how to read. But there are so many studies too that that the differences in students' reading comprehension performance can largely be predicted by their listening skills and decoding skills. Wow. So decoding and listening together are necessary, but neither is sufficient alone for a student to be a good reader. So, I mean, I know we all know about the big five and the phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. But I just, again, want to focus on that language comprehension because that's where listening is. And it's made up of listening and vocabulary. So, I mean, just listening to a story or listening to an audiobook helps kids recognize sounds, not just words, but sounds and letters, especially when they're reading while listening. And they can learn new words, become better listeners, and understand how stories work. So on Listenwise, we have every audio story is paired with a transcript because
great.
That's where the real connection happens. It's when the kids.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. There is a lot of research out there right now that shows having students listen to something be read to them while they're following along actually really increases fluency and comprehension way more than just having them read it alone. So I love that there's things like Listenwise out there.
Absolutely. And there's very few platforms like Listenwise that take authentic nonfiction stories and pair them with an interactive transcript that is highlighting each word as it's read, but they're listening authentically. I know there are a lot of speech to text on many platforms, and there are audio books. But audiobooks, when you're is not as engaging as a podcast. We can talk about that in a little bit about sort of the neuroscience of what goes on when you hear a good audio story versus hearing an audiobook read aloud that's written for reading, but read aloud. But in any event, lots of great research showing this huge connection between listening comprehension and reading comprehension. And one of the most interesting things to me is that your listening comprehension is dominant up until about the 8th grade. And that's such a key factor because we stop focusing, I think, as much on listening and how it interacts with reading in around the 3rd or 4th grade.
Yeah.
There's this huge opportunity to share content with kids to help them improve their vocabulary, to their spelling by looking at a word as they hear it. They're just engaging them with listening.
Well, and hearing you share all of that, I'm sitting here thinking it doesn't matter what age your kids are at home. These are easy things to be just incorporating into your daily life, to be practicing with your kids while you're at home with them. It's not complicated. It's not hard, and it doesn't cost a dime, but it's just additional practice. They won't even know they're getting, but you know what you're providing for them. And, something you and I talked about kind of before this went live too, is the extremely important role that listening plays for our ELLs as well.
Yeah, I mean, learning another language, like you can't learn another language unless you're able to hear it and hear how it's spoken and authentically spoken. That's another key point. So there's no question that it supports language learners in a way that print just can't. Right. They can hear how the words are spoken, and they can, on Listenwise, you can also slow down the audio and the transcript slows down with it. That's a huge scaffold. And also we pull out the vocabulary and look at the tiered vocabulary, pulling out tier 2 and tier 3 words, pre-teaching the vocabulary, discussing it. What I think is really cool about listening to stories and podcasts is that there's the story and the content. So you could be teaching World War II and an interesting lesson about World War II, and then which is based on the content of the podcast. But then there's the whole language element in there that you could also be using with your ELs, like pronouns and their antecedents, or idioms and their use in the story, because it's natural language that you're listening to, but it's of a very high quality. The podcasts and the stories we're pulling are from a variety of public radio, including NPR. RA in Dallas is one of our partners, and they're written primarily for adults.
think I lost you. I don't know if that's my Wi-Fi or yours, but hopefully it'll come back here really soon. So what we were talking about, though, was just the importance of these listening skills. And hopefully as Monica comes back here in a second, let me see. So what we were going to talk about next was, she's going to be joining back here in just a minute because she just dropped out. So hopefully she'll join right back in here. But I love the idea of us listening and just understanding, because I remember that I have a really great friend who is born and raised in Venezuela. And he talked about how the way he learned language and English was listening to TV shows and listening to how they spoke to English so he could better understand it. So Monica, you're back. I was like, I don't know if it's me or her.
Well, I think it's probably me. I apologize. I've been having a spotty problems today. But I just caught the end of your story about your friend in Argentina, because that was me in Brazil. I moved to Brazil. I studied Portuguese in college. I thought I knew how to speak it. I got there. I couldn't even order a cup of coffee. So I went back to school sort of by watching the nightly soap operas and being able to the soap opera had slow moving plot lines and a lot of drama, and they would repeat things. And that's how I really picked up speaking authentic Portuguese. But for our English learners in class, like they don't have that luxury. They need to learn content and language. Yep. So you need to find resources that can do both. And Listenwise can help with that.
Well, and I love that, because you're exactly right. The way we present content in language is very different than the way conversation is had in language, which is why they need to see both of those. And so one thing I'd love to ask you, though, is I know there is a difference between listening and actually being engaged. So talk to me about listening versus engagement.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you want your kids to be engaged in what you're teaching them, and especially if you're remote. Listening provides this connection in your brain that's very, very interesting. It is a full brain workout. When you are listening to something, you are actually sending messages to your neurons that control things like your your sight, your taste, your touch, your muscles. Mm-hmm. So you're like trying to recreate or feel like what it's like to be in the scene. It's called the immersed experience view. And it means that as a listener, you're experiencing something as if you are there. And Todd, that probably explains how you might feel during some of those crime podcasts when you're like, what's going to happen next? Yeah. It is a true neurological experience, and you are creating a movie in your mind, and it's your movie. That's the other important thing about it, is that kids in class each have their own background knowledge and their own visuals to it. And when they're listening, they are creating those things, and that makes a very strong imprint on them, as opposed to looking at a picture of what it should be like, or even reading. Reading doesn't, reading is it's good. It transmits the information. But when you're deep in a podcast that has music and voices, and you're really in that story. You're really there.
And you know what I found is there are so many great, you mentioned soap operas. I've learned that there are soap operas and things through podcasts as well that adults are listening to, because we had some workers doing something at our house and there wasn't any music. And I asked one of the guys, I said, what are you listening to? He's like, oh, it's a podcast. It's so good. Like, we're all in this story. And I'm like, it's so funny to me how many roles podcasts can play, not only when we start young, but if we do start young, growing older and continuing to expand our knowledge. And so thinking about something like Listenwise, give me the big answer on, as a school principal, why would I want something like Listenwise on my campus outside of what I already have? What if I say I already have adults who can read the book out loud? Why do I need something like Listenwise? How would you explain why the importance of having something like this is?
Because listening is an equalizer. Everyone is listening to the same story. The Listenwise platform provides scaffolding that can support English learners, struggling readers. We've got the transcripts, we've got the vocabulary, we've got a platform that allows you to differentiate assignments. We have an online multiple choice listening quiz. We have extra support for definitions and translations into Spanish on the student platform. And that means, very importantly, that everybody is listening and learning from the same thing. And when you level text, it's not the same vocabulary. It's not the same sentence structure. It might be the same content, but it is not as challenging. Students can listen more than 2 to 3 grades higher than they can read.
Yep.
And listening comprehension outpaces reading comprehension until the middle school years. Think of all that time in your classroom where you could be meeting the needs of students who need to have that extra support, and also challenging those who don't need that support. The other reason is that it is a standard in Texas, and it is part of the TEKS. It's woven into it. But it's not tested at the moment. Now, what I've heard from some administrators is that as they're looking at beyond the STAR and starting to think about how to change it in the coming years, that they're thinking about adding listening. And that's exciting because it is in the standards. It's woven throughout. And now there are reliable ways to test it. We have a multiple choice online auto-scored formative quiz. But in the other states, 22 states are testing listening. And actually, Texas is testing listening too, because it is part of the TELPAS for all language, English language learners. So there are ways to test listening. It's already being done, and your students are in their class getting that TELPAS anyway. So why not give them something to practice on and to grab onto?
I love it. And, as we've talked today, it really reminds me of how some things that seem so simplistic and not significant play a very significant role in the development of learners, and not even just our youngest. I love that you said that several times about the role this plays up into middle school and junior high. And I think we can't forget that sometimes when kids struggle, they're not going to get it in 1 year, and we just keep growing and growing, and we can't stop doing these things just because they reach 10 years old. They don't need it anymore. No, it doesn't work like that. So I love that there are platforms like Listenwise. I love that it reaches our ELLs, and that we've just talked about the importance of them with their language acquisition and everything like that. So from everybody here at TEPSA, Monica, I just want to say thank you so much. I know that in the comments, we also included a link to a form that anybody listening or watching can go and fill out to get some more information, and people will be in touch with you. So Monica, thank you for coming on tonight.
Yeah, and I want to thank you so much, and just say thanks to Zaner Blozer. They're our partner in Texas. You might know them from Super Kids and a lot of other great literacy products. And we are thrilled to be partnering with them to bring Listenwise to Texas. Todd, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, everybody. Remember, you can check out any other episodes of TEPSA Presents on our website, on our podcast, on our YouTube page, or right here on our Facebook page as well. Join us again next week as we introduce you to some of our masterclass presenters that will be at our TEPSA online summer conference.